Priests are walking barefoot on cold stone. The smell of burning fat and metallic blood hangs thick in the spring air. The darkest, most fiercely protected room on earth is suddenly exposed to the light. You have probably heard this story. The heavy paroquet still hangs on its gold hooks in the temple in Jerusalem. The psychological veil still wraps tightly around the human mind. The barrier has been breached in a single man, but it has not been destroyed for the rest of humanity. To permanently dismantle the containment zone, the tearing cannot just happen in the clouds above a river. It has to happen on a Roman execution stake. It has to happen in the dark. And the final tear has to start from the top. Matthew chapter 27 records the execution of the Son of God. And when his lungs finally collapse, when the blood slows to a halt, when his head bows in the suffocating heat of the afternoon, the text pivots. When we read the crucifixion story, our modern minds instinctively go to the courtroom. We look at the cross and we see a legal transaction. A judge banging a gavel, a debt being erased from a ledger, and those forensic realities are absolutely true. But Matthew does not give us a courtroom. He gives us a demolition. In the exact moment of death, he pulls our attention away from the iron spikes, away from the splintered wood outside the city gates, and he drags our gaze directly into the dark. Silent heart of the temple. He says the curtain of the sanctuary was torn in two. Most people assume the tearing of the veil is a simple metaphor. They think it was just God opening a door, a symbolic gesture announcing that. The Greek word Matthew uses for this specific fabric is the katapetasma. It describes something spread out and dropped downwards to completely obscure what lies behind it. It is the Greek translation of the heavy, unyielding Hebrew paroquet. For 14 centuries, this barrier did its job. It kept the holy separated from the profane. It kept the pure isolated from the corrupted. It held the lethal radiation of the divine presence in check, allowing a fragile humanity to exist near God without being annihilated. But Matthew says the katapetasma is suddenly destroyed, and the verb he uses to describe this destruction is the exact same verb Mark used 33 years earlier at the Jordan River. Schizo, to cleave, to sever, to rip apart with overwhelming physical force. At the baptism, the sky was violently cleaved. At the crucifixion, the katapetasma is violently cleaved. The heavens open. The temple opens. The divine fire breaks through the cosmic roof, and then it shatters the earthly barricade. And the direction of the tear changes how you read the entire event. Matthew explicitly notes that it tore, from top to bottom, 60 feet in the air, far beyond the reach of a frantic priest's knife. The massive woven threads begin to unspool. The heavy fabric shrieks as it gives way, dropping into a heap on the cold stone floor. The destruction is not a human protest against heaven. The general public is finally welcome to come inside the sanctuary. And that is true. But it is only a fraction of the reality. It is a divine invasion of earth. The tearing of the katapetasma is not a polite invitation to visit God. It is the violent end of the containment zone. The unshielded presence of the Creator is no longer confined to a windowless, pitch-black room in Jerusalem. The protective lead shielding has been permanently removed. The border has collapsed. But there is a massive theological problem hiding just beneath the surface of this text. Tearing a piece of woven linen does not actually fix a severed universe. Ripping a 60-foot curtain does not cure the human heart of its lethal allergy to the glory of God. The physical temple was only ever a shadow. The golden lampstands, the bronze altars, the thick embroidered fabric, they were merely scale models of a much deeper, much more profound cosmic reality, which means the true katapetasma was not made of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn. To find out what actually tore on that Friday afternoon, you have to read a letter written to a group of exhausted Jewish believers. And the author of that letter makes a claim about the veil that is almost too shocking to read out loud. Picture the high priest on the ancient Day of Atonement. His bare feet slide against the cold, blood-stained limestone. As he grips a golden bowl, he breathes the thick, sweet smoke of burning incense, his heart pounding in his chest. If you look closer at the Hebrew and Greek words behind the fabric, at every time a veil is drawn or lifted in the biblical text, terrified that a single misstep past the heavy tapestry will cost him his life. That was the only way a human being could survive, approaching the unfiltered presence of God. But decades after the crucifixion, an unnamed author writes a letter to a community of Jewish believers who are utterly exhausted. They are facing severe persecution. They are bleeding socially and economically, and they are deeply tempted to retreat back into the safety of the old temple system, back behind the heavy, predictable, theological boundaries of the Parochet. The author of Hebrews writes to stop them. In chapter 10, verse 19, he tells them they now have absolute confidence to enter the holy places by the blood of Jesus. He says they can walk directly into the blinding radiation of God by a new and living way that has been opened for them through the curtain. And then he drops the revelation. He says, that is, through his flesh. The ultimate barrier between God and humanity was not a woven tapestry in Jerusalem. It was the physical body of the Son of God. When the Word became flesh in John chapter 1, the incarnation became the ultimate masveh, the biological body of Jesus of Nazareth. A completely different picture emerges. The veil is not a decoration. It is a containment zone, functioned as the final, perfect containment zone. It wrapped the lethal, unshielded radiation of the divine glory in human skin, allowing the Creator to walk among fragile, corrupted creatures without incinerating them on contact. The heavy linen hanging in the temple was only ever a shadow of the biological reality hanging on the cross. When the iron spikes are driven through his wrists, when the Roman spear violently pierces his side, the true veil is being physically severed. The tearing of the katapetasma 60 feet in the air was merely an architectural echo of the cosmic rupture happening in his chest. The unshielded presence of God was breaking out, not just from a dark room, but from the broken vessel of the Messiah. The barrier is completely destroyed. The access is permanently open, but if the containment zone has been permanently demolished, if the glory of God is no longer hidden behind heavy blue yarn or wrapped in unblemished human skin, it forces a terrifying question. What actually happens to a fragile, broken human being who walks through that torn flesh and looks directly into the unshielded face of God? The apostle sits in a dusty Corinthian workshop. His hands are calloused from sewing heavy leather tents. The afternoon Mediterranean sun cuts through a narrow window. It was not designed merely to keep unclean people out of the presence of God. It was designed to keep the lethal, unshielded, radioactive holiness. He looks back at the torn fabric of the temple, and he writes a blueprint for a new humanity. The barrier is gone. The heavy linen lies in a heap. The flesh of the Messiah is torn. The unshielded presence of the Creator pours out into the world. But the divine fire does not destroy. It transforms. In the closing verses of 2 Corinthians 3, Paul makes a staggering claim. He says, "And we all, who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory, are being transformed into His image with ever-increasing glory. We do not hide. We do not run. We do not tie a piece of fabric across our jaws to cover up a fading light. We stare directly into the radiation. Under the old covenant, the glory was terrifying. It was a lethal, radioactive force. It required thick walls, golden hooks, and ropes tied around the ankles of priests. But when the true veil was violently severed on the Roman cross, the nature of the encounter fundamentally shifted. The tearing of the veil is not a change in architecture. It is a change in species. Every time you read the text without seeing the broken body of Jesus, Paul says the koluma remains. The heart stays shrouded. The mind stays blocked of God from breaking out and consuming everything in its path. It is a protective shield for a fragile world. The relationship remains purely transactional. You measure your worth by your obedience. You measure your standing by your performance. That is life behind the heavy fabric. But when a person turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. The psychological barricade burns up in the unshielded light. You stop seeing a demanding dictator in the sky. You start seeing a God who would rather be torn apart than remain separated from you. And seeing that reality rewrites your spiritual DNA. Moses looked at the fire, and his skin glowed temporarily. We look at the cross, and our nature changes permanently. The old system was a containment zone. The new system is a contagion. The holiness no longer stays in the windowless room. It moves. It spreads. It infects the world through the unveiled faces of everyday people. It touches the dead things. It touches the broken minds. It touches the fractured families. The unshielded presence of God is loose on the earth, and it is building a new sanctuary out of human beings. But understanding the theology of the torn fabric is only the beginning. Living with an unveiled heart in a world that constantly demands you hide your face is something else entirely. To understand what actually happens when that heavy fabric tears on a Friday afternoon, you have to understand why it was hung in the first place. But maybe the part of this entire progression that stays with me the most is the fading glow on a prophet's face. The image of Moses, standing in the middle of a dusty camp of black goat hair tents, desperately tying a rough piece of linen across his jaw. Because he is terrified, people will see that the divine fire is leaving him. He is the leader. He is the one who speaks to the mountain. And yet, beneath the masve, he is just a fragile human vessel, desperately trying to maintain the illusion of permanent glory. He thinks he has to hide his depletion to maintain his standing. We do the exact same thing. We are obsessed with containment zones. We weave our own heavy, unyielding paraquet out of our carefully curated social media feeds, our polite Sunday morning smiles, and our flawless theological answers. We hang these massive, thick tapestries up to keep everyone out. We tie the kalama tightly over our faces because we are terrified that if God, or anyone else, actually sees the fading glow, the exhaustion, the quiet doubts, the fractured marriages, the secret addictions we cannot seem to shake, we will be cast out of the camp. We believe that holiness requires hiding. We assume that perfection is the prerequisite for presence. If you are in a season where the sheer effort of holding up that heavy fabric is crushing you, you need to look closely. And that story does not begin in a stone temple in Jerusalem. It begins centuries earlier, in the middle of a barren wasteland, at what happened at 3 o'clock on a Friday in Jerusalem. If you are in a season where God feels distant, where your prayers feel like they are bouncing off a thick ceiling of bronze, where you are convinced that your hidden failures have permanently disqualified you from the presence of the Creator, look at the direction of the tear. It tore from the top down. God did not violently split the sky at the Jordan River, and he did not violently cleave the temple curtain, and he did not subject his own physical flesh to Roman iron just so you could keep wearing a mask. The torn fabric is not a demand for better performance. It is an invitation into absolute intimacy. God is not interested in the version of you that has it all together. He does not want to meet you in the sanitized, heavily guarded outer courts of your life. He wants to step directly into the raw, unfiltered, vulnerable center of who you actually are. He tore the ultimate barrier to pieces so that you could finally stop hiding. When the psychological veil is removed, you do not find a demanding dictator waiting to strike you down for your failures. You find a God who has already absorbed the lethal blow, with a man who walks down a mountain and realizes his own skin has become a hazard, into his own flesh, so he could finally pull you close. Because when you step back and look at the entire scope of the biblical text, from a fragile tent in the wilderness to a shattered body on a cross, a staggering pattern emerges. The priests drop the frayed edges of the linen. The dust settles on the cold limestone floor. The darkest, most fiercely protected room on earth is completely exposed to the spring sun. Because when you step back and look at the entire narrative of the text, a staggering pattern emerges. A prophet ties a cloth across his jaw in the wilderness, and a fragile camp survives a fading light. A heavy tapestry hangs on golden hooks in Jerusalem, and the lethal glory of God is kept in the dark. A savior breaches the surface of the Jordan River, and the cosmic sky is violently cleaved in two. A teacher walks through the crowds of Palestine with an uncovered face, and the raw fire of heaven restores the untouchable. A 60-foot curtain rips from the ceiling to the floor, and the earthly architecture of separation collapses. A Roman spear pierces the biological flesh of the Messiah. It is 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday in Jerusalem, and the earth begins to shake. Exodus chapter 26. Moses is standing in the wilderness, holding the architectural blueprints for a portable sanctuary. The instructions from God are exhaustively precise, and the final barrier of the universe is permanently severed. A psychological shroud is pulled back from the human mind, and a broken creature becomes a living sanctuary. One torn fabric, one violent rupture, one unveiled face. And may the God who would rather be torn apart than remain separated from you, walk with you out of the shadows and bring you into his unshielded light, changing you from glory to glory. If this opens something inside you, subscribe, leave a comment, even one word helps. Share this with someone who is exhausted from holding up their own heavy fabric. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. Gold rings, acacia wood planks, silver bases, bronze hooks, and then God describes a divider. The word your English Bible translates as veil or curtain. Here is the Hebrew word paroket. It appears 24 times in the Old Testament, almost exclusively in the books of Exodus and Leviticus. And its root is fascinating. It comes from the Hebrew verb perek, which implies severity, cruelty, or a breaking apart. In other historical texts, perek is translated as rigor or harshness, the exact word used to describe the crushing slave labor the Israelites endured under Pharaoh. When an Israelite master is commanded not to rule over his servant ruthlessly in Leviticus 25, the word is perek. It carries the weight of a severe boundary, an unyielding and brutal separation. That root changes everything. When you hear veil, you probably picture a sheer, flowing piece of wedding tulle, blowing gently in the breeze. But the paroket is the exact opposite of gentle. It is a harsh, unyielding barricade. The text tells us this barrier was to be expertly embroidered with cherubim angelic sentinels, woven directly into the heavy fabric with scarlet and purple thread. These are not the chubby infants with harps you see. Inside the massive limestone walls of the temple, past the bronze altars and the flickering light of the golden lampstands, hangs a piece of fabric in Renaissance paintings. In the ancient Near East, cherubim are fierce, terrifying guardians. They are the exact same creatures God stationed at the edge of Eden with a flaming sword to keep humanity from walking back in and destroying themselves. The paroket is not an invitation. It is an exclusion. It creates a physical border between the raw, unfiltered presence of the Creator and the fragile, corrupted state of the creature. If the high priest steps past that heavy linen border on the wrong day, or without the blood of a substitute, he does not have a profound spiritual experience. He drops dead on the dirt floor of the wilderness tent. This is why historical tradition suggests the priests would tie a rope around his ankle when he went in on the Day of Atonement. If the bells on the hem of his garment stopped ringing, they had to drag his body out from the other side. They could not go in after him. The holiness of God is like an unshielded nuclear core. It is pure, life-giving energy. But if you approach it without the proper protection, it will annihilate you. The veil is the lead shielding, but the paroket hanging in a tent is only the macro-level architecture of separation. The problem of unshielded glory does not just apply to rooms and buildings. It is not a curtain. It is an engineering marvel. 60 feet high, 30 feet wide, it applies to human skin. And the first time a man encounters that glory directly, he realizes he has to find a piece of fabric of his own. Moses steps off the mountain. The 2 stone tablets are heavy against his chest. The air grows thicker as he descends. The ground shifts from sharp volcanic rock to fine desert dust. He walks toward the sea of black goat hair tents. He expects the leaders to gather. He expects the camp to assemble, but they run. Aaron stumbles backward. The elders throw their arms over their faces. The crowd recoils, pushing against one another to get away from him. Moses does not know it yet. He cannot feel the heat on his own skin, but his face is emitting a blinding, visible light. He has just spent 40 days inside the unshielded glory. The radiation of that encounter has saturated his physical body. He is literally glowing in the midday sun, so he reaches for a piece of cloth. The Hebrew text calls this specific covering a maspheh. It is a facial veil. It appears exactly 3 times in the entire Old Testament. All 3 appearances happen right here, in this single, frantic chapter of Exodus 34. Moses ties the fabric tightly over his face, woven from blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, tightly interlaced with fine twined linen. Ancient rabbinic texts claim it was as thick as a man's handbreadth. Only then do the people cautiously return. He speaks the commands of Yahweh through the woven threads. A new rhythm begins in the wilderness. When Moses walks back into the tabernacle to speak with God, he unties the maspheh. He takes it off. When he walks out to deliver the message, he ties it back on. He enters. He uncovers. He exits. He covers. Revelation. Then, concealment. The maspheh becomes a mobile version of the temple paraket. It is a walking curtain. It contains the divine radiation. It shields the fragile camp. It maintains the physical border between the holy and the human. This is not a permanent fix. It is an emergency protocol. For centuries, readers have looked at Exodus 34 and assumed the story was straightforward. The divine light was simply too bright for human eyes. So Moses had to keep it covered to stop blinding his friends. But 1,400 years later, a man named Paul picks up a pen. Paul is a former Pharisee. He is a scholar trained at the highest levels of first-century Jewish theology. He is writing a letter to a confused, fighting church in the Greek city of Corinth. He looks back at this exact moment in the desert, so heavy that it took 300 priests just to maneuver it when it needed washing. It is an absolute wall of textile. He looks at the cloth on Moses' face, and he drops a detail that completely shatters our understanding of the fabric. Paul says Moses had a secret. The veil was not just hiding the blinding light. It was hiding something else entirely. 2 Corinthians, chapter 3, verse 13. Paul is sitting with a piece of parchment, dictating a letter to a church struggling to understand how the old covenant connects to the new one. He looks back at the Exodus narrative, and he writes a sentence that changes how you read the entire desert wandering. He says, "We are not like Moses, who would put a veil over his face to prevent the Israelites from seeing the end of what was passing away." The word Paul uses for veil in this letter is the Greek kaluma. It appears exactly 4 times in the New Testament, and all 4 appearances are clustered right here in this single, explosive chapter. It comes from the Greek root verb kalupto, which means to hide, to conceal, or to bury. Jesus uses the exact same root in Matthew 10 when he promises his disciples that there is nothing covered up that will not eventually be revealed. And Paul tells us exactly what Moses was burying under the fabric. The radiation of Mount Sinai was not permanent. Every day, Moses spent walking through the dusty camp, away from the unfiltered presence of God. You cannot see through it. You cannot accidentally brush past it. And a human being certainly cannot tear it. The light on his physical skin grew a little dimmer. The sharp, terrifying glow softened. The heat faded into the cold desert night. The kaluma was not a shield against the blinding presence of God. It was a cover-up for the terrifying departure of it. He tied the heavy fabric across his jaw so the Israelites would not panic when they realized the glory was leaking away. The people thought they were being protected from the divine fire. Moses knew they were being protected from the reality that the fire was dying out. The human vessel simply could not sustain the weight of the divine presence. If feeling the text shift beneath your feet like this stirs up questions you have never considered, you are exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe, because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So, Paul diagnoses the ultimate problem of the human condition. He says the Kalama is still there, centuries after Moses died in the dirt of Moab, but it has migrated. In verse 15, Paul writes, "Even to this day when Moses is read, a veil covers their hearts. The barrier is no longer hanging from gold hooks. In a stone temple, it is no longer tied tightly across a prophet's face to hide a fading glow. The heavy, unyielding fabric. Suddenly, a sound like a thunderclap echoes through the holy place. The massive woven wall rips, not from the bottom, has draped itself over the human mind. The separation has moved from geography to biology. It is internal. A veil, woven into the human heart, cannot be casually untied by human hands. It has to be violently destroyed from the outside in. And the first sign of that destruction does not happen in the temple. And it does not happen on a mountain. It happens in the water. He walks down the dusty bank, into the Jordan River. The water is cold against his skin. The crowd watches from the shoreline. John the Baptist places a hand on his back and pushes him beneath the surface. The water closes over his head. He breaks the surface, gasping for the warm desert air. And the sky splits. Mark chapter 1 records the exact moment. Your English Bible probably softens the impact. It likely says Jesus saw the heavens opening or parting, as if God is pulling back a set of sheer curtains to take a quiet look at the earth. But the Greek verb Mark uses is schizo. It is a violent word. It means to cleave, to sever, to rip apart with overwhelming physical force. It is the word you use to describe splitting a thick piece of wood with a heavy iron axe, where a frantic hand might catch an edge. But from the very top down to the floor, two pieces. The barrier is broken. It is the word you use to describe tearing a garment in absolute grief. The sky does not merely part. It violently tears. The cosmic border between the divine and the human is rupturing. The containment zone is cracking. The unshielded presence of the Creator is tearing through the ceiling of the world. The Spirit descends. A voice speaks from the open seam. The radiation that forced Moses to cover his face in the wilderness is now loose in the dirt of Palestine. But something impossible is happening. The unshielded presence is not destroying the fragile vessels. Watch his feet for the next 3 years. This walking rupture moves through the region at a relentless pace. He touches the rotting skin of lepers. He grabs the cold hands of corpses. He sits at tables with the bleeding, the unclean, and the outcasts. The divine fire does not annihilate them. It restores them. The unfiltered glory is no longer a lethal hazard. It is a cure. He moves through the world without a kalama. He shows them the face of God, entirely uncovered. He speaks the truth without a mask. The blind see, the deaf hear, the lame walk. But the ultimate problem remains unsolved. The sky has torn, but the architecture of separation still stands.